How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height of my soul can reach when feeling out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and by candlelight. I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with a love I seem to lose with my lost saints. I love thee with the breadth, smiles, tears of all my life, and if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death.
Well, I grew up in kind of west central Wisconsin, and I had a older sister and a younger brother and a younger sister. And the community up there, which is now Fort McCoy, grew up on that property, which is there. And then third grade, we moved into a small town of Warrens, which was only about 250 people.
Jensen grew up during World War II. Because of this, he had a lot of experience with the war effort.
I was reasonably young yet, but you was always aware of it because they talked a lot about it. And of course, at our grade school there, we always had a scrap drive. There was always a pile of scrap right out in the front yard where people could bring stuff, and we would go out once in a while and pick up scrap. And one other thing I remember that we did a couple of different years was, if you know what milkweeds are, when they harvest in the fall, they bust open and they're real fluffy inside. They use them in life preservers, the stuff from inside of them. So we would go out in the fall as they were starting to open up. They'd let us out of school and give us a bag, and we'd go out in the farm fields there and pick milkweed pods to bring in for the war effort. So you was always aware of it, and he was aware of people that were in the service.
At the relatively young age of 19, Jensen was drafted.
I didn't get drafted until 1953, and that was after the armistice was signed. Yeah, you knew you were still going to get drafted. They didn't let up much on the draft, and I wasn't fearful of it or anything like that, but I had never really been away from home and never been out of the state or anything else, so it was going to be a big deal, and at any rate, and going and not knowing anybody, well, it was kind of a scary time.
When Jensen arrived at boot camp, it didn't take long for him to realize that it was very different from everyday life.
He started getting yelled at immediately and told what to do, and you better do it, and so it was a lot different, yeah. Your first 8 weeks was just infantry basic, and you did a lot of hiking, you did a lot of rifle range, did a lot of shooting, did a lot of duty too.
The duties that Jensen and the other recruits were responsible for during boot camp were extensive. Every day, they were expected to have their rifles cleaned thoroughly, their boots shined, their socks and underwear rolled and placed neatly in their footlockers, and their beds made just so. Every so often, they had to do KP and fire duty. Fire duty consisted of keeping in the coal and cleaning the ashes out of the furnaces that were used in the barracks. KP, also known as kitchen police, began at approximately 3 in the morning and continued until 10 to 10:30 at night.
Boy, this is a hell of a state. It is supposed to snow 3 to 4 inches tonight. We haven't got no clothes yet, and we nearly froze today.
Probably the most thing was the marching, and we hiked everywhere. We marched out to all the rifle ranges, which were several miles out and several miles back, and I do recall when we bivouacked our winter bivouac out for a week, and it went to nearly 20 below zero, and we just had little two-man pup tents. Each person had a half, and you button them together, and you had your little half. It was about 7 feet long and just big enough for two guys to get into. And I remember the night it got so cold, it was four of us, two of the other guys from two other tents. We all got in there together to try to keep warm. And finally, after the second night out there at that cold, so many guys got frostbite that they took us back into the barracks for 2 days until it warmed up a little, and then brought us back out. So it was very much like what Korea was at the time. You know, very cold and not very good facilities. But and Fort Leonard Wood was fairly hilly, so it was some pretty tough marching.
Despite the challenges Jensen faced during boot camp, he found motivation through the friendships he made.
You ended up with a few fairly close friends, and probably a few that you didn't always get along with, but you had to do that. And with 80 guys in each barracks, and there's some you wasn't going to get along with, and some that you made pretty good friends with. And so all in all, I guess that it wasn't too bad.
Well, I only have 2 more weeks to come home in now. I sure want to come home, Glenda, but I just can't seem to get any arrangements that are any good. One of these times I will come home if I have to hitch my way, because I sure do miss you, girl. We should get off either 5 days for Christmas or New Year, so they say. We might and we might not.
Biggest thing was, when was I going to get to go home, because it was coming up towards Christmas, and they said half of us would get to go home at Christmas time and half of them would get home at New Year's, and we didn't know. And I got to go home for a week at New Year's. And from Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, back then there wasn't many ways to get out of there, and we chartered a bus. There was several from Wisconsin, and we chartered a bus to Madison, Wisconsin, I think it was, and then I hitchhiked home from there. But you could hitchhike then, and it was pretty easy to get a ride. If you was in your military uniform, you pretty much was assured to get a ride to somewhere along the line. And I did several times when I was in the service. I hitchhiked home from Milwaukee, which was 160, 70 miles in the middle of the winter, and I took the train that far, and I think that's when I ended basic training and got home.
We went to bed about 8 last night in Illinois and woke up in West Virginia.
I went to engineer foreman school there, and that was the engineer base there in Fort Belvoir, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. And I spent 13 weeks there. One time I came all the way from Fort Belvoir, Virginia, all the way home on a weekend. Got home just about in time to turn around and start back. So you did some kind of silly things sometimes, but usually with trying to figure out a way to get home for a few days or something. I trained my particular class was a bridge specialist, MOS, and so I was trained as a bridge specialist of any kind of bridges that the Army had, which was, at the time, was about 4 different kinds of bridges. But we studied just about everything. In fact, it had all the things that we studied, the hours that we studied them on, and actually I enjoyed that class, and I ended up being first in my class. So it was a pretty proud achievement that I got there, that I was able to do that. But I guess that was my claim to fame in the Army, was that. So, but that also got me sent to Korea, because there was only 4 of us that got the bridge specialist MOS, is what your job rating is.
Well, we are on the way somewhere. We must be 500 miles or better out now, as we have been going for 23 hours now. We are on the General Meigs.
It was by transport ship, and they weren't too big of ships, and they were packed. And of course, never being on the water, I didn't get sick going over, but I did coming home. But it took us 18 days, and we hit some pretty bad weather, and a couple of times where they had to confine us to our quarters down. We couldn't go up on deck, and that would get so stuffy and bad down below the decks that if you could get on deck, it wasn't so bad. You get up in the air, and one of the worst times was going down to the galley to get food, and you had to go down the stairways several levels down into the galley, and then of course the smell and the stuff in the kitchen, and then just the heat and everything coming up out of there. By the time you got to the kitchen, you was about didn't want to eat anymore. And but we had a lot of leisure time on the ship. Just we sat around up on the deck when it was nice and played a lot of cards and things like that. But it was crowded. The bunks were 4 high down in the galley, and or down in the where we slept. And so you had, if you was on the bottom, you had 3 people above you. If you was on the top, you had to climb up over the top of 3 people to get up there. And you just basically didn't even have room to set up at the top. You could kind of lean up a little bit, but they were squeezed together pretty tight, and just rows of them side by side. So we probably had 1,500 or 1,600 people on the ship, and it wasn't a real big ship. They were they were from World War II ships that were they were all named after generals and stuff, but they weren't the most proficient or anything. So it was kind of an ordeal of a trip, and of course during that time, you got no mail, and you could write mail, but you had no place to send it because they sent it all once we stopped in Japan. We never got off the ship, but they took mail off there, and I think they brought mail on there. And so after you'd been out about 3 weeks, you started waiting for your mail to come, and that's kind of the things that kept you going. You get your mail from home and be able to kind of at least feel like you was connected again.
Boy, she is rather rough today. The boat is going all ways instead of just up and down. Well, doll, about 2 more days and I will be in Korea.
Because Incheon has a real high tide there. They have to anchor a couple miles offshore, deep enough water, and they take you in on LSTs, and they're just kind of a barge-like boat. Take us in, and we got off there, and we just piled into what we'd say were cattle trucks. They were just semis, open sides up about 4-foot high sides, and they were standing up and just pack us in there, as many as they could stand in there, just like one of these trucks you see hauling gravel or something here, only a semis, and took us to a replacement depot. And so then I spent one night in the replacement depot there, and the next day they sent a truck down to get us. There was 4 of us that went to that company together, and none of them that I knew. They'd been on the same ship, but I didn't know any of them, so we was completely new again, and went to this company with 4 guys I didn't know, and met the rest of them that I didn't know anybody. So it was another conversion, to a completely different venue, sort of.
Another change Jensen noticed was the difference in the daily habits of the Korean people.
Already when you start getting near shore, you could start getting the smells that you wasn't used to, Korea had a smell all of its own, and I suppose apart from the desolation, but from the food that they cooked and all of that, and with garbage and feces everywhere, because there was no place. The people just went to the bathroom along the road, You'd see them standing there or going along the road as you drove down.
In June of 1950, the Korean War began as around 75,000 North Korean Army soldiers moved across the border between the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to the north and the Republic of Korea to the south. This line was also known as the 38th parallel. Less than a month later, in July, American troops began to fight with South Korea. By the end of 1950, the United States was discussing terms for an agreement to end the war. The armistice the United States was conferring included stopping the entering into Korea of any reinforcing air, ground, or naval units and personnel, holding back from increasing the level of war equipment in Korea, making a demilitarized zone, and addressing the issue of prisoners of war. The armistice that formally ended the Korean War was signed on July 27, 1953. Bridge specialists were needed for evacuation purposes. If troops needed a way to get out, bridge specialists began working until all men were safe. Although Jensen was sent to Korea because of his achievements in his bridge specialist training, he ended up doing more road work than building bridges.
No, never worked on a bridge. Only seen the bridge once while the time I was there. Happened to go over there and go across that bridge. It was on the Han River there. It was still there when we left, as far as I know. We were in construction engineers, or we were, so we did work there with roads, and we had a rock quarry, and we had our own asphalt plant out a few miles out of Seoul. We did a lot of road patching in the city of Seoul. It was nothing in Seoul really then at all. It was just a bombed out city, and the roads were pretty bad shape, so we did a lot of road patching and trying to get structure up and going again. It's basically was what our job was.
I don't feel so good myself, but it is like your sickness was. I think it's what you call genuine love sickness. I think I could take the Army easy if it wasn't for you. I miss you so that everything is about 10 times as bad as it should be.
I sure do miss you, honey. I'm so doggone lonesome. I only got one letter from you this week, and your folks didn't get any. I was down there for supper tonight. I went down to tell them what you had to say in your letter. They were kind of wondering what was the matter.
I got a letter last night. It was wonderful to hear from you. Then tonight I got 2 Valentines and another letter. Them cards were real cute, and the letter, of course, was wonderful. Just reading them gives me a real nice feeling. That is, until I get done with them, then I start thinking and get real lonesome for my darling Glenda. Well, my doll, I got to write to Mom yet, too, so I won't make this much longer. I sure miss you, darling, and I love you more and more all the time. Love forever, your own, Ken.
I'm so busy lately, but I'll keep trying to write to you every day. I love you, Ken. I always will, because you are my man. I can't wait until you are home. Be good, and I'll sign off for now. Love from your baby, Glenda.
My girlfriend, which is my wife now, when I met her, well, she moved in next door when she was 8 years old. And she had a brother that was my age, and her brother and I ran around a lot, and she seemed to follow me a lot. So over the years, it just transpired. I quit going to see her brother, so I started going to see her, I guess. So she's 3 years younger than I was, so at that time, when she moved in there, I wasn't very interested in girls, and I wasn't for quite a long time after that, very much so, because she was just a young little girl, my friend's little sister, but I didn't have no problem. She was after me all the time. I shouldn't say that, but finally I started seeing some value there, and time we was in high school, we started going together, and we pretty much went together from probably in the time I was a senior in high school. She was only a freshman, but we pretty much went together all that time from there on. So I got engaged when I was home on leave. Would have to been after the second 8 weeks of basic training, because I didn't get to go home after Fort Belvoir, they put us right on the plane there and flew us right straight to Seattle, to Fort Lewis, and where I went to Korea from. So.
This time now is hurting, believe me. The time goes real slow, and man, I can't find a thing to do.
Well, we didn't have leave there. Once in a while you could get to, I went once to Japan on R&R, they called it rest and recuperation, and it wasn't a leave, it didn't count off your leave time, it was just I think a 7-day reprieve, and you had to sign up for it, and they had so many that could go, but I went to Japan one time for a week, and Japan seemed like a real luxury when you left Korea and went there, because you went to a hotel and you went to restaurants and you went to nice bars, and you could go out sightseeing, and people were thriving and living good, and it was such a change from Korea, so it was a good experience. After I was there a while, I was only there a month or so, and because so many people were going home out of this bridge company, we were down real low, well under personnel, and of course, we were in a room, we were going to get some new people in, and one day they sent in them trucks, and we got 80 new people all at the same time. And we were used to like 4 people in a tent, and we ended up like with 12 in a tent, and 10 and 12, and so we were really crowded. And so a lot of them didn't stay very long. Probably nearly half of them got sent to other companies after a couple weeks. But these 80 people had all went through Fort Leonard Wood, basic training, and 16 weeks of training all together, and all came to Korea together. So, of course, they didn't all know each other, but they'd all came out of the same units in Fort Leonard Wood, and so a lot of them knew each other, and it ended up that's who I spent nearly all my time with, because a lot of the people that were there when I got there were going home or had before too long, and so I ended up knowing these people quite well, and we spent several months there, and always the same. Not many went home during that time, and pretty much everybody stayed together, and there was different groups that did different things, and so you always thought you was really good friends. Well, it turned out, you go home. All we had to write was free on it, and we didn't have to put stamps on. Of course, they were only 3 cents when I went to Korea anyway, but airmail was 6 cents, so I wrote a lot, and we could not make any phone calls from Korea. If you was in Japan, you could go to a PX or something like that and get in line and maybe try to make a phone call, and I tried one, and I was like 2 hours on the phone trying to make a phone call, and it was several dollars to my girlfriend, which is my wife now, but I never did get through to her. And of course, with a 13 hours time difference, it made it difficult, but I told her when I was going to try to call, and she was waiting, and I wrote letters just about every day to my girlfriend then. In fact, I still have them in my closet, several hundred. She saved them, and of course, our mail come very sporadically. We might go 4 or 5 days without any mail, or maybe even a week, 10 days without mail, and then you'd get 14 or 15 letters, because there was other people that wrote too, and I tried to write back to them because we had a little time to write and stuff. And I knew the one time we did have a radio station right near us there when I was in Seoul, and at night there they had a program on there, Mail from Home, and people could send requests to that radio station, and they'd play your request, and my girlfriend requested one for me, and she told me a request. I listened every night till I finally heard it, but the DJ there, he kind of expounded on a little. And oh, here's somebody who's lonely, you know, and all. And I got letters from a few, he gave out my address, and I got letters from a few other girls, which which my wife kind of took exception to. And I didn't answer them, but I did get some. And but that was, everybody listened, pretty much a lot of people listened to Mail from Home, because even if you didn't know anybody, they told who it was for and where they were from, and so, you know, it kind of gave you a little thing. And it was Mail from Home. It kind of gave you a good sense of feeling there. So
I sure do miss you. I love you so much that nothing matters without you. Life is very dull and sad. I really miss your handsome face popping in the house at intervals. I miss that nice curly dark hair, too.
Every day there is one more until I get to you. I love you, doll, and I always will. I love you and I love you. You are wonderful. Goodbye for now. With love, Ken.
we had left Seoul and we moved out to Kimpo Air Base, and we lived on the air base for a couple months, and that, I understand, is what is the actual Seoul airport now. And it was a few miles out of Seoul, a little north of Seoul, and while we lived in the air base, we lived in tents there too, but we could eat in an Air Force mess hall, and they had a lot better food than we did because they got fresh food flown in. We had everything we had pretty much was dried food or reconcentrated stuff, and even got sea rations a couple times a week, and so we ate pretty good at their mess hall. We moved to a company just outside of the half a mile or so outside of the air base, and there we lived in Quonsets, and that's the first we lived in other than tents on the whole time I was there. And so yeah, then you get to be down to about 100 days. If you put up your short timer calendar and start marking off the days and when you were supposed to go home and hope that you made it. And golly, I guess spent most of my time saying goodbye to all the friends, and of course where we were there, we just happened to be about a mile across some rice paddies to the replacement depot, so I got sent over there for about 4 days before you went to the ship, and so that's where our company, we always went over there to the PX and to the movie and things at that company, so I got to see them. They come over every night anyway, so it wasn't like I left them completely that first day. I got to see them afterwards, and we had probably 5 or 6 that were real close and hung out together pretty much all the time. We always, either all of us or some of us always did things together, you know, and there was other people that you hung out with too, but basically I had 5 or 6 or 7 that were the closest friends, and I went home before any of them because they were all in that group that come in together, and so they still had about 3 months because I'd added the extra 3 months in Fort Belvoir, so my time was up quite a while before they were. So, but yeah, you was always looking forward to going home, and but then you just started looking forward to be able to see the United States, and we came into Seattle, and some of them got out in Seattle, some of them went other places, and we went to a replacement depot, and we got in there about noon, I think, and they gave us our beds for the night and everything. I got our mattresses, and along about 7 o'clock they come in and called off a bunch of names, said, you guys turn in your bedding and get out to the bus, you're going to Fort Sheridan. So yet that night, and so we went and got on the plane and flew to Fort Sheridan, and that's where I got discharged from, but I had to spend a weekend there before I got out. Of course, you come back, in my case, I come back to a small town where everybody knew me, and I was just back home, you know. It was, I've heard a lot of stories of it wasn't always like that to every place, but yeah, I think we were treated fine. You just got out of the Army, and it was home. the whole Army situation changed a person a lot. I think it was a good experience to go and learn a whole kind of new set of values and disciplines, and I think it was very good for a lot of people. And so that way I don't think the draft was a bad thing. A lot of people would have, I think, improved from it and learned a lot from being in the Army, because it was good to learn something about discipline and living together with a lot of other people. So. Got together out in Nebraska on one guy's farm, and I think there was 8 of us that got together out there and had a little reunion, and it's fun. I said, oh, we ought to do this again. Well, it was 30 years after that. We decided to try to get together again, and we had a few addresses. And first one we had went back out to Nebraska, because that's where the guys that were kind of doing it, and it was 3 of us. I drove out there, and the other 2 lived right there. We had a nice weekend together, and the next year there was a guy from Washington flew out there, and so there was 4 of us. So, well, we decided, we started looking, trying to get addresses. People had some addresses, and so next year we had it in Des Moines, Iowa, and I arranged that one, and we had 6 people showed up. So then I said, this is kind of fun. So we, back then we didn't much have any computers or anything, and we didn't have one. And so my wife and I, we went down to public library, and I had a little address book about so big that I'd gotten in Korea and tried to get everybody's address. And I had this little address book and telephone numbers. Well, some of the telephone numbers, these rural, were like 3-digit numbers, you know. And but I found out as I started going, went down to the library in the white pages down there, and started looking up names. And I started getting a hold of quite a few names, and I kept at that. And so the next year we had a reunion together in Des Moines, and we had 21 people show up, 21 veterans. I just kept working on it and trying to get addresses, and over the years I contacted 49 people that was the right person, and we're still doing a reunion. We're having one again in September. It'll be our 23rd straight year. 22 is the most we've ever had at one, and we've had a lot of them that have died since then. And but through this, we've had lots of wives that never knew each other before, have become very close friends, and had some real close friends out of it, and friendships, and of course we're losing them every year, and a couple of the wives died last year, and one of the veterans died, and so actually over the years there's 31 different veterans have attended at least one reunion, and after we'd been doing it for a few years, I made a DVD of it and gave everybody a copy. And we started out, I got pictures of some of them from their childhood and when we first got into basic training, and any of them that would send pictures, some did and some didn't, and then some afterwards. I wish I'd have sent pictures, and you know, we got high school graduation pictures and Army pictures and pictures of their marriages, and then pictures from the reunions, and I put that all together, and of course my son Kevin helped me with it, and in fact he did the voice on it, and we put music to it, and usually about once a year before I go to the reunion I get it out and play it again, and just to renew it, and you see all the ones that have at least come, and at least once or twice, and so that was a good thing and a good project, and the ones of us that get together still have a good time. It's surprising when you got a hold of some of them people, they were just absolutely excited about it, and one of the first people that ever returned my call, he just called me back. He said, "How did you find my name? I've been looking through VFW magazines for reunions." He says, I just been looking for something like this. And he says, hoping for it for years. We don't rehash what we did there. We've just made new friendships, and of course, the first few years we talked all about it, you know, and everything we done, and of course, most of the wives hadn't all heard these stories, and some of them embellished them pretty good, and well, I guess it just seemed like it was kind of an important thing to keep in touch with these people and see what happened in their lives.
Well, darling, I guess I'll sign off for tonight. I love you more than you could guess, unless you love me as much, and I think you do. I hope anyway. I'll always love you, Kenny. Remember it as you go through the day. All my love, Glenda.
Well, darling, I love you very, very, very much, but I gotta sign off for now. All my love forever. Your Ken.
When I decided to take vet doc, I was intimidated beyond belief. War and everything that comes with it had already had a huge impact on my life. When I was in 5th grade, my grandpa committed suicide because of post-traumatic stress disorder. In the last 7 years since he died, I felt many emotions: sadness, hatred, hopelessness, and anger. So, when I decided to take vet doc, I knew I was going to struggle hearing these stories and creating a documentary about them. But the class quickly changed my perspective. It helped me to change the negative emotions to one such as understanding, compassion, love, and respect for veterans, as well as to forgive my grandpa. I've seen firsthand the toll that war can take on veterans and their families. Everything they had to go through and everything they continue to go through for our country and for all of us is not in any means simple or easy. I have my veteran Kenneth Jensen to thank for helping me to see the reality of war and for giving me an opportunity to document his love story in the midst of a war. Mr. Jensen has taught me so many lessons. Staring at his face and listening to him speak for hours on end has taught me that every veteran has a unique story to share. The only way to really understand the history of war is to listen to the people who have experienced it and are willing to share their piece of the past. Kenneth and his wife Glenda's love story will forever hold a special place in my heart. Kenneth Jensen, thank you for sharing your story, thank you for your service, and thank you for helping me heal.